Saga is special. When I think about my personal favorite and most influential pieces of fiction, Saga is regularly at the top of that list. Whether I'm talking about my love for series like Invincible, Better Call Saul, Alien, Cowboy Bebop, or any other great works I love, Saga always stands out. Occasionally, I will find a work that truly redefines and transcends the medium it was made in. One could argue that albums such as Dark Side of the Moon or Nevermind transcend their medium because they've inspired entire subcultures due to what they inspire in the listener. Other comics, such as All-Star Superman or Watchmen, blow the hinges off the metaphorical door of comics because of how excellently those stories were crafted and what they say about culture and how the world reacts to the larger-than-life figures. Saga doesn't transcend the medium of comics. However, Saga relishes in the fact that it is a comic book. This story was created with the idea of the Western comic at the forefront. Nowadays, many comic writers create comics in hope of getting licensing agreements with huge streaming companies so they can get a buttload of money and become the next Robert Kirkman or Todd McFarlane, which is totally fine. I don't fault creators for wanting to be able to make bank off their creations. Get that bag. But Brian K. Vaughan created a world that just can't simply be adapted into a TV show or a movie. He went into this story wanting to write a comic. The world of Saga is massive, the characters are flawed, and quite frankly, there's no way a filmmaker would be able to get the budget for a hard R movie like Saga nowadays. In an interview with Screen Rant about this subject, Vaughan had this to say. I still probably think not yet, but I wouldn't have imagined what was possible with Runaways now being possible 15 years ago, so maybe in 15 years we will have caught up. I still think for now, I flatter myself to think Fiona and I are doing something that celebrates what only comics can do, which is the scope beyond a Hollywood blockbuster in terms of the visuals, but also a challenging grown-up story like you would get in a long-form TV drama. I think it's still very difficult with what we're trying to say and do for that to be done in film and television. I remain not completely opposed to it, but for me, it's so not the goal. I would rather just keep my head down and keep making a great comic book, than get out there and chase a great adaptation. This vibrant world created by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples is something that truly changes the way I look at comics. This comic started releasing in 2012 and it has garnered a cult following and is one of the biggest titles on Image right now. This world is centered around an ongoing war which expands into this grandiose space opera that deeply impacts all of those involved. Yet, in the grand design of this war, we have a family that is fighting against all odds, choosing not to partake in hate but to participate in love. Usually. Unbeknownst to Alana and Marco, their little Hazel changes everything. The entire comic is narrated by Hazel as she recounts the incredible adventure that her family went on. As we follow this family, they gain and lose so much over the years, and it makes the reader feel like they're going along for the ride of a lifetime. Vaughan and Staples have created a story that, despite featuring almost exclusively aliens, feels distinctly human in its approach. The trials of this group of family and friends are something that every reader can relate to. You will laugh, you'll cry, and sometimes you will be emotionally crushed by the world of Saga. The scope of this story is on the same scale as something like Game of Thrones or Star Wars. There's so many different factions with every single character having their own motivations and past. The universe of Saga feels so lived in while exploring new mysteries throughout the entire galaxy. I hope that if I can get one person to fall in love with this series, it would make this video worth it. I feel a need to spread the holy gospel of this book. Nevertheless, this is Saga, the best comic ever made. This is how an idea becomes real. I know I mentioned it in the intro already, but the world of Saga is dense. Never have I read a story that had such a fleshed out world just from the first issue. In the first issue alone, we see Hazel get born, they run from Landfall's forces, we get introduced to Prince Robot, the Fourth, as he is drawn back into combat in order to find these lovebirds, all the while a bounty hunter named The Will, and his pet lion cat, gets a contract to kill Marco and Alana and bring their baby back alive. On top of that, Marco and Alana make it to a super haunted forest where on the outskirts we see a grand scale splash page of the war. This sets the reader up perfectly. There's plenty of death, gore, and humor within the first 50 pages of this incredible story. Many times I've caught myself being awestruck by the large-scale set pieces and the downright beautiful character development that happens time and time again in this series. Throughout this video, I'm going to emphasize just how fucking crazy the world of Saga is. We have your standard sci-fi planets like Cleve, Landfall, and Wreath, but just as we're getting used to this already nutty world, we get introduced to places like Sextillion, a rocket ship treehouse, and planetoid babies. In issues 4 and 5, we see the Will take a break from his bounty mission, i.e. give up when he finds out his ex is after the same bounty and wants to max out his business allowance, basically, and he heads to Sextillion. Basically, it's an entire planet filled to the brim with strip clubs, hookers, and blow. This colorful world is shown to us rapid fire as we see sex shops, sex workers, all with inventive designs and apparatuses. There's another outlandish design with the Stalk, a spider lady alien bounty hunter who has a past with one of the few humans in our story, the Will. The design of these characters, ships, and items in Saga are usually very consistent in quality, but Vaughn and Staples don't feel the need to over-explain everything. They just trust the reader to think, oh hey, that's a cool ship design, and flip to the next page. While researching for this video, I was looking up interviews for Vaughn and Staples. This one interview with The Observer gave Fiona an opportunity to explain the design philosophy behind the creative and unique character designs in these series. The credit goes to Brian for describing a lot of these weird aliens in the script. He'll usually give me a sentence or two explaining what animal the creature looks like and maybe what they're wearing, and then I try to execute that in a way that fits in our universe, and what that character's role is supposed to be. Sometimes I have complete free reign, like with Goose or Dr. Sheriff, and I just do something cute. While a lot of credit is given to Vaughn, rightfully so, with the creation of Saga, Fiona Staples is sometimes overshadowed in a lot of online conversations, and that's just a travesty. Her art is absolutely incredible, and it fits this distinctive world extremely well. The world of Saga is expertly designed by her. I especially love how she draws the different cultures, and they don't clash while they're shown on the same page together. Just take the Wreath and Landfall forces. The Moonies are mage-like and look more in line with D&D characters as opposed to space opera characters. However, they're completely compatible with the more futuristic wings that are on the page. I think this is largely because Saga is established by including a lot of varied worlds in the story. Most sci-fi settings like Star Wars or Dune show everyone on a somewhat level playing field thanks to technology and one or two extra things like the Force. However, Saga flips that on its head by having sci-fi technologies be on the same playing field as magic. These two facets of the world go head-to-head all the time in the story. It's at the central conflict of the world. Because of this, when Marco opens a magic portal on his flying treehouse spaceship, we don't think twice about it. Saga is a book that manages to have characters be compelling in no time flat. Whether we're talking about the core group of friends or the people hunting them, all of the characters in Saga are shown to have great depth that instantly makes them compelling. The dialogue is also expertly written. I've read thousands of issues of comics, so let me tell you that I know when dialogue between characters seems stilted, corny, or just straight up bad. And Saga has none of that. Vaughn writes these characters in relatable and realistic ways. He's obviously written some other great books including Paper Girls and Why the Last Man, as well as being a writer on Lost. So it didn't surprise me at all when I found out that the universe of Saga has actually been developed by Vaughn since he was a child. The inspiration for Marco and Alana actually came from Vaughn's experience in parenthood and preparing to have a child. I think Vaughn putting his own insecurities about parenthood is what really sells these two characters. In interviews, Vaughn has described Saga as perverted Star Wars, but I have to say that it is so much more than that. We get character moments that honestly dwarf pretty much any of the character arcs found in Star Wars. He does this by not making these characters noble heroes, but just regular people from opposite sides of a brutal war. I always think it's funny when I look at the letters readers sent into Vaughn and Staples while Saga was first releasing. Within the first year of the comic coming out, people mailed in pictures of themselves dressing up as a variety of the characters from the story. Sure, you had a lot of people dressing up as Marco, Alana, and Isabel, but you almost see more people dressing up as our central antagonists like the Will, the Stalk, and Prince Robot IV. And I think it's because we spend the same amount of time, if not more, on the people that are hunting our protagonists. Because of this, when the first half of the story starts to wrap up, we see all the character arcs and motivations come to a fruition that have been carefully laid out over the course of 50 or so issues. There's so many examples of great writing in Saga, even really early on. In the 4th issue of Saga, we see the Will go to Sextillion. He's greeted by the sex-crazed workers and eventually meets up with a pimp. As the pimp is promising some good action to the Will, he realizes that the woman this pimp was talking about was a small girl, a child, made a sex slave by any number of adults that have failed her. Almost without thinking, the Will kills her pimp and telling her to look away. Fast forward a little bit, the Will adopts her and names her Sophie. Now at the end of the day, the Will and Gwendolyn team up, but they get sidetracked trying to take care of Sophie. My favorite moment of Sophie is when she's talking to Lion Cat in issue 14. The Will is a fan favorite character and it's abundantly clear why. If he was just pitched as a gruff bounty hunter with a cool lance, he'd have the general interest for like a day. But because we see him kill Sophie's pimp, we learn that he does have at least some sort of code. He'll hunt and kill kids, if that's what the job requires, but he doesn't want a kid to be abused. We later find out that the reason why he has a soft spot for Sophie is because he was also abused in his childhood by his father. It was just him and his sister, who also so happens to be named Sophie. Kid Sophie once ate some psychedelic berries while on a foreign planet that sent her into a craze. Just as the Will is starting to realize what's happening, in a trance, Sophie stabs him in the neck. Instead of panicking or screaming out, the first thing he does is try to mutter out, "Not your fault." Like, god damn. We see so much character development, and it's done in organic and believable ways. While I may like to focus on the Will because his character arc is frankly amazing, the same applies for basically every single character in Saga. In another issue, Hazel is narrating a rather brutal encounter her family experienced that she argues against the kill your darlings piece of advice that's frequently given to writers. Hazel, and by extension Vaughn, fight against this as a seemingly important side character gets killed in the span of just a couple panels. It shows how quickly these seemingly beloved characters can just move out of the story. It offers a bit of meta commentary, and it shows that Vaughn understands that the certain side character didn't have a place in the story and instead focuses on the characters he's truly passionate about. Kill Your Darlings is defined by Masterclass.com as you kill your darlings when you decide to get rid of an unnecessary storyline, character, or sentences in a piece of creative writing. Elements you may have worked hard to create, but that must be removed for the sake of your overall story. Going as far to offer meta commentary while killing off a character that we spent the past volume with is actually pretty impressive. Whenever people act as if comics are just superheroes punching bad guys with a thin layer of plot, I can't help but think how wrong that is. Saga, like a lot of well-written comics, is written not by a comic book writer, but by a competent writer. Vaughn is excellent in carving out experiences for these characters to go through. Because of the visceral nature of most of these experiences, whether physical or emotional, it leaves you feeling like you just got punched in the gut. Prince Robot IV is another mainstay character that's a fan favorite. His arc starts as him being a pretentious and callous asshole on a very cemented side of the war effort. This self-serving character made waves through the mountains of sass he'd be dishing out every single issue. Born as robot royalty, he always believed that he was one of the betters in society. This starts to change as he realizes that he's stuck in similar situations to the people who he considers to be below him. However, when he and Marco decide to team up in order to find their children, he starts to soften up. Sure, he does this for a slightly self-serving reason, but by the end of the book we see that Marco truly understands who Robot is. Robot would do anything for his son, and by proxy, he'll do anything to help Marco and his family. They become best frenemies along the way. Now, very rarely do I find myself truly invested in war stories. Sure, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and Warhammer do feature wars and large-scale conflicts, but I feel like Saga adds a much more human aspect that pulls me in. We constantly see how many sacrifices are being made and how many lives are being pulled into this conflict. The deaths in this book are frequently quick, scary, and have long-lasting effects on the entire series. Now, without spoiling anything big, this is one of those stories where no one is safe. It takes a Tarantino-esque way of killing off characters, and every death in this series has left an imprint on my brain. With all that said, I think it's really interesting to see how one of the main characters of the book, Marco, is directly opposed to violence, especially at the beginning of the series. In our first issue, when Alana is giving birth, Marco refuses to draw his sword even though they're being hounded by enemy forces, believing that Marco and Alana were on the run from their respective factions. Slowly, Marco's vow against violence is challenged time and time again. It's clear that in order for him to help create a world in which his daughter is safe from this violence, that he can't participate in the cycle that put him in this situation to begin with. Slowly, after many near-death encounters, we see how Marco transforms from a pacifist to someone who will do anything to protect his family. The writing of Marco does an excellent job showing us where he moves his standards to every time after a new violent incident ramps up the ante against his family. Speaking of the multiple family men of Saga, let's talk about Dengo. Basically an insert of the Unabomber into the story, Dengo offers an erratic and unpredictable energy that makes him one of the most interesting characters in the series. His portion of the story is kicked off with him kidnapping Prince Robot's son. Seeing how easily he was radicalized by this war allows us to see a whole new aspect. Taking an almost libertarian approach, Dengo aims to bring the whole oligarchy of the robots down. Dengo was an uncolored, poor member of the Robot Kingdom whose son died due to a treatable disease, but was left to die because the Robot Kingdom was too focused on the war effort to give proper healthcare. The parallels between the politics of Saga and the politics of the real world aren't exactly subtle, but they definitely hit home when it comes to showing governments that don't make their people a priority. Vaughn's writing and Staples' art always do a superb job of conveying just how violent the world of Saga is. One of the examples that always comes to mind is from issue 12. We see a flashback from one of Prince Robot's battles where he was shot in the neck and bleeding out. A local medic decides to help in the conflict because she appreciates the wings and is solely against the horns in this war effort. As they have a fairly casual conversation despite the battle, gas starts leaking onto the battlefield as Prince Robot starts screaming to put masks on. The medic whimpers that there was a treaty, presumably against using gas weapons. The medic's last words are, "Wait, Am I dying? Am I gonna? And she violently explodes. In a world where one of our main characters dreams of the bloodiest battlefields one can imagine, Saga constantly finds new ways to show just how cruel this war is. Alright, this will be a quick spoiler portion of the video, and I'm warning you right now. Skip to the timestamp on the screen if you don't want to be spoiled about a pivotal point in this book. Skip this if you have any intention of reading Saga. Thanks for watching. Okay, you have 3 seconds. As I've said, there's some gut-wrenching character deaths in this story, and that's because of the great character writing, the brutal aftermath, and the reader's overall investment into the story. So that's why when I was reading one of the final issues of the first half of this story, my heart shattered. Very rarely do I see protagonists that I truly think feel like real people. Alana and Marco are just written so well, and honestly, they just feel like real. Between the dialogue they share for one another, you could tell just how much they love each other and how much they love their daughter. Now, Marco's pacifism is constantly an inner battle with himself throughout the series. At the climax of our first half of the story, the Will has officially tracked down Alana and Marco and is ready to make his way back to Gwendolyn and Sophie. The Will kills Prince Roba as the conflict escalates to the Jellyfish House, with Marco and the Will inside fighting. Marco knows that he must fight in order to protect his new family and is just about ready to kill the Will after they exit the atmosphere. But Marco stops. He gets up and looks at the planet below. Whether he was reveling in the beauty of the home he set up for his family or thinking about how he won't kill anymore, we won't know. We're left with a quiet page of Marco just looking. In a gut-wrenching page turn, we see Hazel's comments. "Thanks to my parents, I get to grow old." As the reader turns the page, we're greeted to the Will delivering a killing blow against Marco. As Hazel says, "Not everyone does." This goes back to the kill your darlings point from earlier. Marco is a fan favorite, sure. But this isn't his story. It's Hazel's. And he's reached the end of the journey. Man, just rereading that gutted me. Marco's death hasn't fully paid off yet as of writing, but seeing the way it will propel the rest of Hazel's life makes it the most significant scene in the entire series. So, what did you think? If I've officially sold anyone on Saga, I've put some links to buy the omnibuses and trade paperbacks in the description below. I'm also happy to say that the world of Saga is far from being over. Even though the first omnibus collects issues 1 through 54, Vaughn and Staples have said that they're only about halfway done with their planned story. So if you binged Saga after watching this video, we have years of story left ahead of us. Alright, thanks for watching. The wonderful world of Saga has captivated me since I first started reading it a little over a year ago, and I'm in love. Keep an eye on the channel for any and all upcoming videos. We have plenty more coming, as per usual. We also have more episodes of the BS Crew podcast coming soon as well. Alright, as always, you've been wonderful, I've been Jared, and I'll see you next time.